every breath you take, and every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every single day, and every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you. 'Cause don't you see, you belong to me. Well, hello, my lovelies, ladies and gents, boys and girls, pets of all kinds, dogs, cats, rabbits, fish in aquariums, and all my other story addicts. The seen and the unseen. Did you miss me these past few days? I hope so, because I certainly missed you. As you all know by now, I'm Sangeeta Bahadur, and this is a special Halloween episode of my all-new series, Tattle Tales. And because it's for Halloween, it's a particularly eerie one. To the extent that I scared myself as I was writing this down. While I've fleshed it out in my own style, as usual, the story is essentially a recounting or a retelling of a rather sinister personal experience shared with me by a friend a few years ago. This time, I'm taking you to Iran. Not a country I have ever been posted to, but whose history and cultural heritage has always fascinated me. It's amazingly multifaceted and truly ancient Persian heritage, I mean, not its recent history, to which I have developed a strong antipathy. Not merely because of what is being done to women in that country, something that infuriates my proudly feminist heart, but also for very personal reasons, which I'm going to share with you before we move on to the story itself. I'm calling this special Halloween episode The Terrible and the Fair, a phrase borrowed from a rather disconcerting poem by Edgar Allan Poe called Al-Araf. Go look it up and you'll know what I mean. I found it very apt given the nature of today's tale. Ancient India and ancient Persia had excellent relations, as we all know, with strong cultural and economic ties. That was why when Islamic invaders marched into Persia around 13 centuries ago, brandishing their trademark fire and sword, those who refused to convert to the new religion chose to flee to India to seek refuge and shelter. Their ships docked first in Diu, where they lived for a while before moving on to the coastal kingdom of Sanjan in Gujarat. Now, there is this beautiful story I heard when I lived in Ahmedabad for a while. And I'm sure maybe some of you have also heard it, perhaps not this exact same version, but something along these lines. The essential elements of the story remain the same, but there are minor variations that I've heard from different people. This one is my favorite, so let me tell it to you. So the story goes that King Jadi Rana of Sanjan, when he heard about the arrival of these refugees, sent a vessel brimming with water to the leader of the newcomers. It was a symbolic message indicating that his kingdom was already full to overflowing with his own subjects and could not accommodate immigrants. What do you think the Persian leader did? What do you think he said? All he did was pluck a leaf from a tree and float it gently in the water before sending the vessel back. That was his symbolic reply, assuring the king that his people would live in Sanjan like a leaf on water, without displacing or disturbing the local populace in any way. Disarmed by the response, Jadi Rana not only welcomed them, but allowed them full freedom to practice their own religion, their own customs. Now, those of us who are Indians know that this has always been our way. We never force our own religion, our way of life, our customs, traditions down anybody's throat. And that tolerance continues to this day, very often to our own detriment. But, well, there you are. So anyway, to this day, as we all know, Zoroastrians, or Parsis as they're commonly called, continue to live and thrive in India, mostly in Gujarat and Maharashtra, with dignity and equal rights. In their hearts, they still hoard and cherish the invaluable, intangible treasure of their ancient beliefs, rituals, myths, and lores. Unfortunately, in the decades since the Shah of Iran was deposed in 1979, bilateral relations have gone through several ups and downs, mostly downs, I'd say, and attempts to mend them have succeeded only partially, at best. Since this is not a political history class, I won't waste your time and mine going into the whys and wherefores, which are all available on the internet in any case. The only reason I'm mentioning this at all is to share with you a horror story of my own and of another kind altogether. My own nightmarish experience on my one and only transit through Tehran. What happened there not only rudely stripped me of my erstwhile genuine desire to visit Iran someday and steep myself in its stunning natural and man-made heritage. It also riled me enough, at least for a while, to make me focus entirely on the dark side of modern Iran, ignoring all the bright and enthralling elements of its glorious past. It was probably the fiercely resentful vibes I was sending out for months after the Tehran fiasco that attracted the shocking, scary story I'm going to narrate to you a little later in this episode. As I said in the beginning, I heard this story from an Iranian diplomat's wife who had become a friend over a late evening coffee at her home. And I can still remember her shivers and my own as we sat submerged in that haunting, disturbing tale. But first, my own horror story of Tehran. See this black scarf? I never wear it, but I've kept it with me for almost 6 years now as a sort of, how do I put it, a badge of helpless humiliation and burning fury such as I have never known before or since. What happened, you ask? Well, I was traveling to Mumbai on an official trip from my country of posting. We'll leave out the specifics. And I was traveling as India's ambassador, mind you, armed with a red passport that always makes you feel invulnerable because of the automatic courtesy it guarantees. I had to catch the connecting flight to Mumbai from Istanbul, but I missed it. Why? Because my earlier flight to Istanbul landed there much too late. So after around 7 hours of waiting at the airport, the airline finally found a seat for me on an Iranian Airways flight that would first take me to Tehran for a 50-minute, yes, less than an hour's transit before I boarded my final flight to Mumbai. All very inconvenient, but what choice did I have? My baggage had already been booked directly to Mumbai, so I was only carrying my cabin luggage with some papers for the meetings and a single change of clothes just in case. A couple of hours later, we landed at the Tehran International Airport and the nightmare began. The transit desk, manned by 2 charming young men, was all fine and dandy. They helped me check in, and because there was very little time left, one of them offered to escort me to my next flight, already parked at the closest air bridge just a floor above. All I had to do was climb the single set of stairs and go through security before walking about 100 steps, not more, to board the plane. To my bemusement, I saw several Iranian clerics, their moral police, as I discovered later, sporting dark robes, turbans, and long beards lining the steps and the entire pathway to the security check cubicles. Looking a little anxious, my young escort urged me on, calling out loudly in Farsi, which he quickly translated for me, that I was an Indian diplomat catching my connecting flight to Mumbai in under half an hour. Paying him no heed, and to my absolute stupefaction, the clerics simply pounced on me. Pushing and pinching me, they snarled in my face, roaring insults and abuses in Farsi with a few choice phrases in English. Shameless woman, sinner, whore, thrown in for good measure. I had never felt more powerless, more unsafe, and more violated in my life. I was horrified to find myself weeping with rage and humiliation as the outrage continued for what seemed like forever, but was probably just a few minutes. My stunned companion, babbling pleas and prayers, literally shielded me with his body as he pushed and pulled me out of that hostile crowd, explaining rapidly that it was all because I was not wearing a hijab. And never mind that this was the transit area of an international airport crisscrossed by people from all over the world. I was still trembling with mortification and with rage when I entered the segregated security checkpoint for women, which, believe it or not, turned out to be even worse. The chadar-smothered women personnel turned out to be far more aggressive than the bearded men on the stairs. Not only did they viciously abuse and manhandle me, turning me into a victim of victims perhaps, they also grabbed and confiscated my diplomatic passport, not caring two hoots that I was India's ambassador to a nearby country and merely transiting through their airport due to an accidentally missed flight. That, they declared, was no excuse. How dare I arrive without a hijab, even if I had not been headed there in the first place? No matter what I said, they refused to return my passport unless I produced a head covering out of thin air and wore it to the air bridge just 100 steps away. Genuinely appalled by the way I was being treated, the young man from the help desk finally just ran to a nearby store, bought this black scarf with his own money and pressed it into my hands, begging me to just put it on and go. I still remember the last words he said to me as I wrapped this alien piece of cloth, the symbol of someone else's barbaric morality, around my head. This is an awful country for women, he told me sadly. Didn't used to be, but has become one now. Just leave, madame, and don't ever come back. Do you blame me for being traumatized for months? Was the matter taken up with the Iranian Foreign Office by our embassy there? Yes, it was. Did anything come out of it? Even an apology? No, it didn't. And so, I've kept the scarf as a bitter reminder of what it means to be a woman in a draconian regime like that. Even a foreign diplomat protected under the Geneva Convention. So, when my Iranian friend narrated this terrifying family story, I soaked it in like a sponge and have remembered it almost word for word. Because, you see, it linked so neatly with my own recent trauma. It's a very feminine tale in the sense that all the main protagonists, the good, the evil, and the victims are female. I'm not calling them women because some of them aren't. This happened to my friends, let's call her Fareen. It happened to her maternal grandmother, whose name was Mehnaz. At least we'll call her Mehnaz in this story. Way back in the early 1930s. Iran was still officially Persia, and Reza Khan Pahlavi had been the Shah for less than a decade at that point. And now, on to the actual story of this Halloween episode. Let's get into the mood before I tell you the rest of the story. Come with me. What do you think? Nice, right? And you can actually imagine something different happening in this kind of an ambience, right? And the story I'm going to proceed with will be very different. Before we proceed further though, let me clarify something for those of you who wonder why I keep looking down while I'm telling you the story. That's because I'm not telling these stories extempore. I've written them all down and I read them out of my laptop, which I keep right here, but maybe sometimes you cannot see because of the height of the camera, etc. Because, I don't want to pause or stutter while I'm telling you the story. But the quality of the storytelling remains the same or better than it would be were I telling it extempore. So now, to proceed further. As I was saying, this story was recounted to me by my Iranian friend, the wife of an Iranian diplomat, and it pertains to her grandmother, whom we are, for the purposes of this story, calling Mehnaz. And this happened way back in the 1930s. So, the young and exquisite Mehnaz, all of 21 then, had been married to Fardeen, the scion of an old aristocratic family and an officer in the royal army of that time, for almost 2 years. She was happy in the way of women of that era, living a pampered but sanitized life with her in-laws in the elegant family mansion located close to the royal palace. This was before the controversial Kashafe hijab, the mandatory unveiling of women, was introduced by Shah Raza in 1936, allowing women the freedom to step out of their homes and make their own place in society. So you see, Iran has come a full circle since then, from mandatory unveiling to forcing the hijab on every woman who sets foot on Iranian soil, whatever her nationality, whatever her faith. Anyway, in the early 1930s, women were still largely confined to home and hearth and had learned to find satisfaction, even pride, in their role as homemakers, wives, and mothers. Ordinarily, Mehnaz should have birthed at least one child after 2 years of marriage, but her husband's frequent absence in the line of duty had delayed that happy milestone in her life. Her in-laws didn't like it, but agreed that it really wasn't her fault. Finally, Fardeen was told firmly by his parents to request a month off and take his bride on a Mahe Asal, a sort of honeymoon, the second one in their case, to celebrate their upcoming wedding anniversary. Apart from giving them some exclusive couple time, the holiday might also, it was hoped, set them on the road to parenthood. The venue chosen for the Mahe Asal was their ancestral home in the beautiful province of Golestan, one of the few green stretches in the country, bordering the Caspian Sea. Those of you who've been to Iran or have seen it on the map or in a movie would probably know what I'm talking about. The place had been left in the care of an estate manager and a retinue of servants these past 30 odd years, when the family shifted to the new residence in Tehran. Mehnaz had never been there and was excited at the prospect of spending time alone with a handsome soldier in what she was told was virtually a palace. Small but jewel-like, set amidst lush green hills and barely an hour's drive from the sea. Their 3-car caravan bearing the young couple, the 3 drivers, 2 personal servants, trunks of clothing, baskets of food for the road, and what Fardeen's mother Nazneen deemed as minimum daily essentials, took almost 12 hours to cover the distance of 300 odd kilometers. The roads were narrow and far bumpier in those days, and the maximum speed of most cars was nowhere near that of their modern counterparts. By the time they pulled up in front of the sprawling manor, it was past 8 in the evening, and Mehnaz was exhausted from the longest journey of her life. Her indulgent husband ushered her straight into the vast, luxurious bedchamber prepared for them by the resident staff. Unused for decades, It still smelled mildly of mildew despite the hurried airing, but was otherwise impeccable. Too tired to go to the dining hall, they had dinner brought up to them, and Mehnaz barely managed to eat a few mouthfuls before she literally passed out. She woke up next morning feeling fresh, energized, and determined to make the most of the hard-won time together. Fardeen, enchanted to see his demure little bride transforming into a sultry seductress now that they were away from censoring eyes, cooperated fully. Apart from a few daytime excursions on foot to explore the surrounding forests and sometimes the echoing hallways and empty rooms of the enormous manor, they barely left their bedchamber, as you can imagine. For some reason, Mehnaz didn't quite like walking through the silent wings and deserted courtyards of the old residence. She would find herself shivering for no reason or breaking out in goosebumps as they wandered down a corridor or climbed some narrow, dark staircase. And she was glad they didn't do that too often. Fardeen appeared to be oblivious to whatever was plaguing his wife, amused and charmed by the way she would cling to his arm or burrow into his side whenever he decided to take them on another little familiarization tour through the property. Choosing not to say anything to him about her unease, Mehnaz focused instead on enjoying the precious time she was getting to spend with her husband in their bubble of togetherness where nobody else existed. She had no idea if they would achieve the main objective of the trip, pregnancy in short, but refused to let that bother her. The languorous, happy days passed as days will, and they were suddenly just 48 hours away from returning to the real world. On the second last night, Mehnaz lay awake for a long time beside her sleeping husband, staring wistfully out into their private and very large balcony, watching the night swirl around them and ardently wishing that she didn't have to go back. They didn't have to go back. Just as her eyes finally began to droop, she felt, more than saw, a movement among the shadows dappling the balcony. Slowly, her heart thumping with anxiety, she sat up in bed, debating whether to wake Fardeen up, but what if it had just been her sleepy brain and the clouds in the sky playing tricks on her? Wouldn't she feel silly if she shook him awake only to discover she had been frightened by the shadow of a tree in the large garden below, or by some stray cat dashing across the balcony? The residence was surrounded by high walls. There were guards at the gate, and at least a score of servants slept in the quarters they occupied in the adjacent wing. So a thief stealing into the premises appeared unlikely. The knot in her stomach wouldn't loosen though. So she decided to take a quick look. Throwing on a silken wrap, she quietly stepped out of the chamber into the arched stone balcony and looked around. She couldn't see anyone, neither a cat burglar nor a cat. The garden below slept serenely in the pale glow of the gibbous moon riding high in the sky. After a moment, she sighed and began to turn away, shaking her head at her own overactive imagination. That was when her eyes fell on the tree that stood barely 20 meters away, swaying gently in the night breeze. A figure sat on one of its jutting branches at roughly the same height at which Mehna stood. A female figure, she thought as she jolted with shock, wrapped in something dark and billowing, tangled dark hair reeling around its shoulders. Lazily swinging its legs, it appeared to be looking straight at her. She couldn't see the features in the uncertain light, couldn't see the eyes, but could still feel the gaze dig into her like the razor-sharp claws of a bird of prey. Hey, so initially I had decided that I'll bring this special Halloween episode, which I'm calling The Terrible and the Fair, to you in 2 parts. 2 long parts, because quite apart from the main story, which is really scary, I'm also bringing you a couple of smaller ones and some history and a little bit of my own experience. Not not a ghostly experience by any means, but an equally horrible one. The episode, obviously expanded and became pretty long. But although initially I had thought that I'll, do it in my usual style, on one Friday, the first half, and then a gap of one Friday, and then the second half of the episode would be available for viewing. But then I decided, why rush through it? This is the Halloween month, and rather than just wrapping it all up in barely 2 episodes, let's break it up into 4 so that you have something to look forward to every Friday, starting from the 18th of October and ending on the 8th of November. It will also make you feel more connected to the Halloween festival and to the idea that there are things that do go bump in the night and which you can't always either see or experience or even understand. In the meanwhile, let me wish all of you an amazing festive season. A lot of prosperity, a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, and also an interesting Halloween. So, I'll be seeing you soon. For the time being, take care of yourselves. Bye.